Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the i5-4460 is what I'd consider my first ever gaming CPU. I bought it as an upgrade to my G3258, which to be honest could handle itself fine at the time, though it quickly began to struggle due to its 2 cores and lack of hyper-threading. It was at the end of 2016 that I made the switch to the quad-core chip after having paid a decent price for it. £90 was lower than the average £150 selling rate. These days they can be picked up for a fraction of that price, and I paid just £35 for one. That's less than the price of a new Pentium, and I couldn't help but wonder if a 4-core 4-threaded CPU like this, once considered a respectable and solid gaming chip by all, still has what it takes to play games smoothly. For the money, it sounds like a great way to get into gaming on a lower budget, even after taking into consideration used socket 1150 board prices. This is a processor that will run all the latest games as of mid-2020, but how well is the question. Firstly, let's take a look at the Cinebench R20 performance. The results are pretty much what you'd expect from a 4th generation Intel Haswell quad-core, in that the multi-threaded performance is slightly improved over its Ivy Bridge predecessor. It's a solid everyday chip still, and there will be no issues with general usage. I even edited this video with it using Premiere Pro, which was fine. Now for the fun part, gaming. If it wasn't for this YouTube channel, I'd probably still be using this chip, or at least I would have used it in my system for a lot longer than I did. I eventually swapped it out for a Ryzen 3 1200 on the AM4 platform, which gave me a better upgrade path, but even so, buying one of these now still means you could upgrade to something like an i7 4790K, which is still a solid performer, especially with an overclock. So what you're going to see in this video is a lot of the CPU running between 90 and 100% usage. I've paired it with a 1080 Ti to get the most out of it, as well as 16GB of DDR3. That way the processor can hopefully reach its maximum potential without anything holding it back, although this may not be the case for some GPU intensive games. What I mainly mean by that is Red Dead Redemption 2. This will usually use all the GPU power you have to offer, and run fine on most quad cores. If you have a graphics card that on paper should be capable of hitting 60 frames per second on average in every game you play, then that card should still do so with an i5-4460 in your PC. The CPU doesn't hold us back to a point where things become unplayable, though there are still 1 or 2 occasions where this theory doesn't work. Flight Simulator comes to mind. I decided to take off from Manston, a now disused airport that boasts the 11th longest runway in the UK, and begin a journey to a busy London destination. Flying over the Kent countryside means our frame rate stays pretty stable, plus I get to see my house, even if the temptation to try and land in my garden does get a bit much. Games like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the online Warzone segment of the game, will also run well, but you will notice in situations like this that the CPU reaches 100% usage and stays there a lot of the time. This doesn't hinder the overall average frame rate, which hovered around 60, and overall the experience was a pretty good one. In terms of other online multiplayer fast-paced games like CSGO for example, well, you'll see a similar result, though of course the frame rate will be a bit higher and the CPU usage should be a little bit lower. The average frame rate here came back at a pretty respectable figure, so you'll have no trouble in playing Counter-Strike with this CPU. I then tried out Far Cry 5, which only really uses 4 cores, so it will run fine on the i5-4460, even if there is a little bit of lag and stutter here and there. Overall though, you will see at least 60 frames per second on average with 1080p at the high settings when using something like a 1080 Ti. I wouldn't recommend pairing a 1080 Ti with this i5, as it is a little bit overkill, but this is of course just to show you what the CPU can do when it's not held back. Now, although Fallout 76 didn't particularly exhibit high CPU usage in terms of the MSI afterburner reading, there were a few lag and stutters here and there. I've noticed this with a lot of quad-core chips, but the game does also do this on many other powerful processors as well. I mean, I get lag and stutter on my Ryzen 5 3600, which of course has 6 cores and 12 threads. So yeah, this is one of those games that just lags at various intervals for no particular reason. It's not had the best run Fallout 76 since its release, but I'm enjoying it at the moment, and it does perform on a wide range of hardware pretty well, if you don't mind the occasional dip in performance. Now, Hitman 2 with the highest settings ran very well indeed. I played through the first level here, still a very popular game is Hitman 2, and to be honest, over 100 FPS was not a problem for this setup whatsoever. It's a couple of years old now, and it's one of those games that really highlights what the i5 4460 can do. It's still quite powerful in some regards when it comes to less demanding games like this one. The game looks good and it performs rather well as well, though I can't really speak for other levels as I did only test this first one. I imagine that you should have no trouble seeing over 60 frames per second though, the majority of the time when you're playing this title. Now, I'd like to end on the Outer Worlds here. I've thrown this back into the benchmark roster because this does exhibit a few problems on certain CPUs, and what you'll notice with a 4-core CPU like the i5 here is quite a few frame dips. Although the average is quite good, the 1.1% lows will suffer when using a chip like this one. I've also noticed the same thing happening with AMD graphics cards. This seems to run better with NVIDIA cards, and yeah, it's quite CPU intensive it would seem, because with 4 cores and 8 threads I don't have that many issues, but with 4 cores and 4 threads, well, frame dips do persist. This is one of those games that's best capped to your monitor's refresh rate. For example, capping the game to 60 FPS would give you a much smoother experience because you aren't going to notice the drops as much. So this has been the i5 4460 review in 2020, I guess. It's still a pretty solid chip in some regard, though as we move forward through the year now and into 2021, I imagine its lack of hyper-threading will cause a few more issues. I still think it's a great way to get into gaming if you are on a tighter budget, because £35 here from CEX in the UK is no money for a quad-core chip that was once very respected among the PC building community. And even so, it's still got some life left in it. Don't forget, if you get yourself on the 1150 platform, because you are looking for a used and therefore cheaper build, you do have the upgrade potential for something like a 4790K as well. Alternatively, it may be worth looking out for hyper-threaded quad cores or AMD 4-core and 8-threaded chips that are slightly cheaper anyway and offer a better upgrade path. Perhaps something like a 1500X on the AM4 platform if you can get it at a good price. Thank you for watching though. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.